The auction yard buzzed with restless voices, the air heavy with the mingled scent of sweat, hay, and dust. Under the pale light of a sinking sun, the crowd leaned against rusted rails, eyes sharp, voices sharper, each person waiting for their chance to claim what they wanted at the lowest price. Some horses stood tall and glossy, their coats brushed until they gleamed, their heads high, with nervous pride. Others shifted uneasily, ribs showing beneath dull hides, their futures uncertain. Among them was one that drew no interest, no curious glances, no whispered bids of promise. He was thin, gaunt to the bone, with a coat that had lost its shine long ago. Scars mapped his flanks, and a faint limp slowed his step as he was led to the center. His mane hung tangled, his head lowered as though he carried a weight too heavy to lift. The auctioneer's voice rang out, quick and practiced, calling for numbers, coaxing for bids. No one spoke. The man's voice pressed harder, cracking with false enthusiasm, but the crowd only laughed. "Start him at 100, he barked. Silence. 50 then. Still nothing. Someone muttered, "That bag of bones ain't worth the rope tied to him." Laughter rippled through the spectators. The horse flinched at the sound, his ears twitching nervously, eyes darting at the blur of faces. He had seen this before, the cold glance that turned back the cruel hand. His heart hammered, though his body stood still, frozen by fear that had long ago become familiar. $10, the auctioneer tried, his voice softer now, a hint of frustration creeping through. A man in the back snorted, "I wouldn't take him for free." The crowd erupted again, a storm of ridicule that cut sharper than any whip. The horse blinked, each sound slicing deeper, reminding him of every moment he had been cast aside, every empty day when no one came, every hunger pang that had burned in his belly. He had learned what it meant to be forgotten. Finally, the auctioneer sighed, his gavel poised in defeat. $1, he said almost bitterly, as though spitting out the words. "Will anyone give me $1? Silence held for a breath. 2, 3. And then, quietly, a voice rose from near the front. "I will." Heads turned, surprise flashing across faces. A young woman stepped forward, her clothes plain, her posture steady. She did not smile, nor did she falter beneath the mocking eyes that now fell upon her. Her gaze was fixed on the horse, not with pity, but with something softer, something steady. She lifted her hand. $1, she repeated firmly. A scoff rose from the crowd. "Waste of money," another called. "He won't last the month." Yet no one else spoke, and the auctioneer, weary of the silence, dropped his gavel with a dull crack. "Sold," he muttered, "for $1." The crowd shifted, disappointed in the lack of spectacle, already turning their attention to the next lot. But the woman remained, her eyes on the trembling creature before her. Slowly, she approached, her boots crunching over the dirt. The horse stiffened, muscles taut, as though ready to bolt, though the rope held him still. She reached a hand forward, not swiftly but gently, her palm open, her movements patient. The horse snorted, pulling back, his eyes rolling with fear. "It's all right," she whispered, though her words were not meant for the crowd, not meant to prove anything. They were quiet, almost secret, spoken as though only the horse could hear. "No one's going to hurt you now." He did not believe her, not yet. But something in her tone was different from the sharp voices he had always known. She did not pull the rope, did not slap his flank, did not demand obedience. She simply stood, waiting, her hands still and steady. The horse's ears flicked uncertainly, his breath coming quick. At last, he lowered his head just slightly, as though surrendering for a moment to the possibility of peace. She exhaled, slow and relieved, before signaling for the trailer to be brought forward. Rust streaked its sides, the paint chipped, yet the straw inside was fresh, clean. The horse hesitated at the ramp, hooves clattering as he resisted. A few men nearby chuckled. "Won't even load. Good luck with that one." The woman ignored them. She stood beside him, her voice calm. "One step," she murmured. "Just one." Minutes stretched long. Finally, with a tremor of exhaustion, the horse moved forward, his hooves thudding onto the ramp, carrying him into the narrow darkness of the trailer. The door shut behind him with a hollow clang, and suddenly the crowd, the dust, the noise, all of it fell away. Inside the dim confines, he shifted uneasily, ears twitching at the rattle of chains, the faint creak of metal. He had been loaded before, always taken somewhere worse than the place he had left. His body remembered every jolt, every stop that ended in cruelty. As the engine rumbled to life, his eyes flickered toward the faint sliver of light above the door. He felt the trailer shudder, wheels rolling over the uneven ground. The voices outside faded until only the hum of travel remained. His breath quickened. Where was he going now? To another place of hunger, another field of loneliness, another owner who would cast him aside when he failed to please? His chest tightened, fear pressing down like a weight he could not shake. And then, faintly, he heard her voice again. Though muffled through the steel, it carried with it a calmness that pierced the noise of his panic. "You're safe now," she said. The word seemed too strange, too impossible to believe. Safe was not a word that belonged to him. He lowered his head into the straw, eyes closing against the sway of the trailer. Darkness gathered around him, heavy and uncertain, and his thoughts sank into it like stones into deep water. He did not know if her promise was real. He did not know if tomorrow would be different from yesterday. But as the world outside blurred into distance, a fragile thread of something unfamiliar stirred inside him. It was not trust, not yet, but was not despair either. The trailer rattled on, carrying him away from the place where he had been sold for a single dollar, and toward something he could not yet imagine. The trailer rattled to a stop as dusk slipped into night, the last streaks of orange fading behind distant hills. The woman cut the engine, and the sudden silence pressed heavy against the metal walls. Inside, the horse shifted, hooves scraping nervously, his breath harsh in the stillness. The door creaked open, spilling lantern light across the straw-lined floor. The woman's silhouette filled the frame, her figure calm, her voice low. "You're home now," she said. The word home meant nothing to him. He pulled back, eyes flashing white in the dim glow, his body trembling with the memory of every place that had promised safety and delivered pain instead. The ramp lowered, groaning under its own weight. She stepped aside, not pulling, not forcing. The rope lay loose in her hand. "Come when you're ready," she whispered. For a long time he stood frozen, head low, nostrils quivering at the scents drifting on the cool air, damp earth, wood smoke, and hay that smelled fresh, not sour. His ears twitched at distant sounds, a dog barking faintly, the laughter of children carried on the breeze, the creak of a windmill turning slowly. They were unfamiliar, yet not cruel. Still, suspicion anchored his hooves to the floor. The woman waited, her patience unyielding. At last, he edged forward, one hoof testing the ramp, then another. Each sound of wood beneath him seemed too loud, too final, but he moved on, step by hesitant step, until the night air touched his skin. His body tensed as though expecting a blow, but none came. She walked beside him, silent, her presence steady as the stars above. The yard spread wide and humble before him. A small barn leaned with age but stood strong, its doors open to reveal clean stalls lined with golden straw. A paddock stretched into the shadows, fence posts sturdy though weather-worn. The farmhouse nearby glowed warmly with lights spilling from its windows, the murmur of voices within rising and falling like a lullaby. Children peeked from the porch, eyes wide with curiosity. A boy whispered, "Mama, he looks broken." His sister hushed him, though her gaze lingered with quiet pity. From the road, a neighbor's voice drifted, sharp with disapproval. "That one won't last the week. Should have saved your dollar." The woman ignored them. She led the horse gently into a stall, untying the rope with care. Fresh water shimmered in a bucket, and a pile of hay lay waiting. He sniffed at it, suspicious, before pulling back as though even food might betray him. She did not press. She only set the halter aside and stepped back. "You decide," she murmured. "Eat when you're ready. Trust when you can." That night, the horse stood in the corner, eyes fixed on the door, refusing food, refusing rest. Shadows moved, voices drifted, every sound feeding the unease that gnawed at him. He had learned to survive by watching, by waiting, by never believing kindness when it appeared. The woman came once more before sleep, setting down a lantern, its glow soft against the wooden walls. She did not touch him, did not speak this time. She only stood there, watching, her gaze steady but gentle, before leaving him alone with the silence. Morning came with the cry of roosters and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Sunlight spilled through the cracks of the stall, warming his coat. Hunger burned sharp in his belly, but still he held back, pacing slowly, as though one bite would bind him to a trap he could not escape. The woman entered, her steps unhurried, a bucket in hand. This time it held oats, the scent rich and sweet. She poured them into a wooden trough, the grains falling like rain. He turned his head away. She waited. After minutes stretched long, she set the bucket down and walked out, leaving the door open. Curiosity warred with suspicion. At last, his hunger won. He edged forward, muzzle dipping, nostrils flaring as the taste filled his mouth. It was not poison, not bitter, not cruel. It was nourishment. A shiver ran through him as he ate, as though he barely remembered what it meant to be full. From then, the days unfolded in small, fragile steps. Each morning, she came with water and feed, speaking in a voice that carried neither demand nor threat. Each afternoon, she stood near the paddock, leaning on the fence, her presence quiet. He watched her from a distance, ears flicking, muscles tight, yet slowly his fear dulled into wary curiosity. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she entered the paddock without rope, without whip. She approached slowly, her hand extended. His body stiffened, ready to flee, but she stopped short, leaving space between them. Her voice broke the silence. "You don't have to let me in. Not yet, but I'll keep coming back." The words meant nothing he could understand, but the tone carried weight, steady and unbroken. She turned and walked away, not looking back. Something in him stirred at her retreat, a faint pull he did not know how to name. Nights were harder. Dreams came unbidden, lashes of the whip, the sting of hunger, the cold floor of forgotten stables. He would startle awake, breath quick, body slick with sweat. From a house, he would hear her voice sometimes, faintly carried on the air, speaking softly to children, laughter rising between sentences. The sound was strange, but it eased him, loosening the knots of fear even as he fought to keep them tight. The village whispered. Some mocked the woman for wasting effort on a lost cause. Others shook their heads in pity. She should have chosen a horse with promise, they said. Yet she paid them no mind. Her focus never wavered. Each day, she gave him not force but time. And each day, though only by inches, he began to shift. One late evening, clouds rolled heavy across the sky, the air sharp with the promise of rain. The woman secured the barn and whispered her usual good night. The children's laughter faded into the house, and darkness deepened. Alone in his stall, the horse paced, restless. Something inside gnawed, fear, memory, instinct. The open air called to him, louder than the straw beneath his hooves. A loose latch, unnoticed, hung on the stall door. With one push it gave way. The door swung wide, the night rushing in like freedom. He hesitated only a moment before bolting, hooves striking dirt, breath tearing from his lungs. The field opened before him, wide and endless beneath a sky split by flashes of lightning. From a farmhouse, the woman's voice rang out, urgent, desperate. A lantern flickered as she ran into the storm, calling his name though he had never been given one. Her feet pounded the earth, her voice cracking through the wind. He raced through the darkness, faster, farther, until the fence fell behind and the land opened to wild emptiness. And there, at the edge of the fields, the ground fell away into a steep ravine, rocks jagged, shadows deep. He skidded to a halt, hooves slipping dangerously near the edge, heart hammering with terror. Behind him, the lantern's glow wavered, the woman's figure approaching, her voice breaking the roar of the storm. "Please," she called, her hand outstretched. "Don't fall." The horse trembled, caught between fear of her and fear of the drop, the storm raging around them both. And in that moment, the night held its breath. The storm raged overhead, thunder splitting the sky into violent cracks of sound. Rain slicked the horse's coat, lightning flashing across his trembling body as he stood frozen at the ravine's edge. His hooves slipped dangerously on the wet earth, pebbles skittering down into the abyss below. His chest heaved, each breath harsh, his eyes wide with terror. Behind him, the glow of a lantern wavered, the woman's figure pushing against the wind. She moved carefully, slowly, her hand raised as though reaching across an invisible gulf. "It's all right," she called, her voice steady despite the storm. "I won't hurt you. Please come back." The horse flicked his ears at her voice, trembling harder, torn between instinct to flee and the yawning drop before him. He shifted one hoof, the earth beneath it crumbling. For a breathless second, it seemed he would fall. She gasped, stepping forward despite the danger, her lantern swinging wildly in the storm. "No ropes," she whispered, though the rain nearly drowned her words. "No whips. Just me. Trust me, just this once." Her tone was different, urgent, desperate, but threaded with something unwavering. Not command, not demand. A plea, fragile yet strong. The horse's body shuddered with fear, but some echo of that voice reached deeper than instinct. Slowly, carefully, he pulled back from the edge, his hooves scraping against the slick mud until he stood on firmer ground. The woman exhaled sharply, relief breaking across her face. She stepped closer, but not too close, letting him breathe, letting him decide. He stood panting, soaked and shaking, but he had chosen not to fall. For the first time, he had chosen her. That night, she led him back, though not with rope or force. She walked ahead, lantern swinging, and he followed at his own pace, his eyes fixed on the glow. Behind them, the ravine disappeared into shadow, swallowed by the storm. Morning brought clear skies and a silence heavy with exhaustion. The horse stood in his stall, damp straw beneath his hooves, his body weary but alive. She entered quietly, carrying fresh hay. He did not flinch this time. His ears twitched, but his head lowered, and when she set the hay before him, he ate without hesitation. The smallest shift, yet it changed everything. Days became weeks, and the fragile thread of trust began to weave into something stronger. The woman spent hours beside him, brushing the knots from his tangled mane, her movements slow, deliberate. At first, he resisted, jerking his head, muscles tight with fear. But she never struck, never shouted. She simply paused, whispered soft reassurances, and tried again. Little by little, the brushes no longer felt like threats, but like comfort, each stroke a promise that he was safe. One morning, she entered with a halter. His body stiffened instantly, memories flooding back of rough hands and stinging ropes. She did not force it over his head. Instead, she let him sniff it, her hand steady, her voice calm. "Just leather," she said softly. "Not chains. Not pain." It took days before he allowed it to rest against his face, and even then his eyes rolled with unease. But she persisted, never rushing, never breaking the fragile bond they were building. The villagers watched from beyond the fence, shaking their heads. "She's wasting her time," they muttered. "That horse will never carry a rider. He's broken beyond repair." Their voices carried, meant to wound, but the woman never faltered. Each evening, she whispered to him, as though the words were a secret only he deserved to hear. "You're not broken. You're just waiting to be whole again." Slowly, the horse began to change. His coat grew shinier with care, his ribs less visible as strength returned. His steps steadied, the limp easing as his muscles rebuilt with movement. He learned to walk beside her without pulling away, to follow her gentle guidance across the paddock. Sometimes he stumbled, panic rising in his eyes, but she was always there, her presence anchoring him. One crisp morning, as autumn leaves scattered across the ground, a notice arrived in the village. A charity showcase would be held, a gathering where horses would be displayed, raced, and judged not only for skill, but for spirit. It was the talk of the town, a chance for pride, for competition, for proving worth. The woman read the notice in silence, her hand brushing over the paper. That evening, as she leaned against the stable door, she spoke quietly to him. "They'll all be there," she said, her voice carrying a mix of challenge and hope. "The ones who laughed at you, the ones who said you'd never matter. I think it's time they saw the truth." Her decision was made. She would enter him in the showcase, not to win glory, but to prove that worth could not be measured in dollars or scars. The villagers laughed when they heard. "That $1 horse," they scoffed. "He'll make a fool of her in front of everyone." But their ridicule only hardened her resolve. Training began in earnest. Each day, she led him through the fields, teaching him to walk, then trot, then gallop beside her. At first, he faltered, memories of whips and harsh commands surging each time. He moved too quickly. But her voice was different, steady, encouraging, filled with quiet strength. "You're stronger than you think," she told him. "Every step is yours, not theirs." The bond between them deepened with each trial. There were setbacks, moments when he reared in panic, moments when his fear threatened to undo all progress. But she never gave up. She stood firm, her patience unbroken, guiding him back each time. The horse began to listen not only with his ears, but with his heart, sensing that her trust in him was unshakable. As the showcase drew near, whispers filled the village. Some mocked louder than ever, eager for her failure. Others grew curious, watching the once ruined horse transform before their eyes. The children, once skeptical, began to cheer him on, their voices carrying across the fields. "Go on, boy. You can do it." The night before the event, the woman lingered by his stall, her hand resting on the wooden door. The horse stood tall now, his body filled with new strength, his eyes brighter than when she had first seen him. Yet doubt still lingered in her voice, quiet but real. "Tomorrow," she whispered, her fingers brushing his mane. "Tomorrow they'll see who you are. Not a broken horse, not a mistake. They'll see the spirit I've seen all along." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held steady. "I believe in you. That's enough." The horse shifted closer, his breath warm against her hand, a gesture small but filled with meaning. For the first time, he was not only surviving. He was ready to face the world that had once turned away from him. The lantern light flickered as she stepped back, closing the stall with care. Outside, the village prepared for the spectacle of the morning, banners raised, laughter spilling into the night. Inside the barn, silence lingered, broken only by the steady rhythm of his breath. He stood tall in the shadows, waiting. Morning broke clear and sharp, the sky brushed with pale hues of gold and silver. The village buzzed with anticipation, voices carrying across the streets as banners were hung and stalls prepared. The charity showcase was more than an event. It was spectacle, pride, a gathering where horses gleamed and owners strutted, each eager to prove their worth. The woman stood quietly at the edge of the grounds, her hand resting lightly on the reins of the horse who had once been sold for $1. He shifted beneath her touch, muscles tense, ears flicking nervously at the swell of noise. Polished stallions tossed their heads nearby, their coats shimmering like liquid bronze, their manes braided with care. Spectators whispered, pointing, laughter bubbling, when their eyes landed on the scarred figure that walked beside her. "That one," a man scoffed. "She's wasting her time." "Barely fit to pull a cart," another muttered. "Watch him crumble." She heard them, every word cutting like stone against glass, but her gaze never left the horse. She whispered softly, "Let them talk. Today we show them something they don't understand." The announcer's voice rang out, calling competitors to the ring. One by one, horses entered, each greeted with applause and admiration. Then her name was called. A hush fell, not of respect but of anticipation for failure. She stepped forward, guiding him into the open arena, the earth firm beneath his hooves. The crowd's laughter rose again, louder now. "Look at his scars," someone shouted. "That horse can barely stand." The sound pressed against him, a tide of cruelty that echoed too closely to every rejection he had known. His body quivered, his breath quickened, his eyes darted as though searching for escape. She moved closer, her hand brushing his neck, her voice steady as stone. "Breathe," she whispered. "Don't listen to them. It's just you and me." The first test began, a walk across the arena, steady and controlled. He hesitated, hooves digging into the dirt. The crowd's noise surged again, mocking. Her voice cut through it, gentle but firm. "One step, just like before. You can do this." And he did. One step, then another, his body trembling but moving forward. The laughter dimmed to murmurs, surprise threading through the disbelief. He walked the length of the arena, scarred yet steady, his head lifting higher with each stride. The next test called for a trot. Doubt flickered in his eyes, memories of pain pulling him backward. She met his gaze, her own steady, unshaken. "I'm here," she murmured. "With you. Always." He moved forward, first awkward, uneven, then stronger, his legs finding rhythm. The dirt flew beneath him, his mane catching the wind. Gasps rose from the crowd, the laughter faltering, replaced by awe. For the first time, the horse no longer moved as a shadow of his past, but as a living testament to survival. The final challenge came, a short gallop around the ring, a test of speed and spirit. The air thickened with tension, the crowd leaning forward, eyes fixed. He hesitated, nostrils flaring, fear threatening to pull him back. She stepped closer, her hand pressed against his shoulder. Her voice, dropped to a whisper, meant only for him. "They said you were worthless. They said you'd never matter. Prove them wrong. Not for them. For you." Something shifted within him then, deep and undeniable. With a surge of strength, he leapt forward, hooves pounding against the earth, each stride faster, surer. His mane streamed behind him, his body stretching with power that had long lain dormant. The arena filled with the thunder of his gallop, a sound that silenced the crowd. He stumbled once, a sharp gasp breaking from the spectators, but he caught himself, driving on with renewed determination. Dust rose in a golden cloud around him, the sun catching on his coat, transforming scars into marks of honor. By the time he slowed, chest heaving, the crowd was silent, stunned, breathless. And then slowly, the silence broke into applause. It swelled, rising higher, until it roared like the storm he had once fled from. Children cheered, elders nodded, voices cried out in disbelief and admiration. "From $1 to this," someone whispered, softening the words. The woman approached him, tears shining in her eyes, her hand resting against his damp neck. "You did it," she whispered, her voice breaking with pride. "You showed them what I've always seen." There was no first-place ribbon, no trophy. But as he stood tall in the center of the arena, scars and all, he carried something far greater. He had won dignity, respect, and freedom from the weight of rejection. The villagers looked at him not with scorn, but with wonder. When they left the arena, whispers followed, not of pity, but of inspiration. "That horse was sold for $1, someone said, and today he was priceless." The journey did not end with the showcase. It continued in the quiet days that followed, in the trust that deepened with each shared moment, in the way he no longer flinched from touch, but leaned into it. He ran free in the fields, his stride powerful, his spirit unbroken. At dusk, the woman often stood at the fence, watching him gallop across the horizon. Each time, her chest swelled with gratitude, not just for what he had become, but for what he had given her, a reminder that healing was possible, that second chances were worth the fight. The horse, once discarded, now carried a story etched in every scar, a story of resilience, of belief, of a bond that transformed not only him, but those who witnessed it. He had been sold for $1, but his worth could no longer be measured in coin. It lived in every breath of freedom, every beat of his hooves against the earth, every life touched by the sight of his triumph. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky in shades of fire, the woman leaned against the fence, her voice soft as she spoke into the wind. "They thought you were nothing," she said, "but you were always everything." The horse lifted his head, ears pricking toward her, his body gleaming in the fading light. He trotted to the fence, pressing his muzzle against her hand, a gesture filled with trust, with love, with a bond forged in the fires of survival. And as darkness fell, he galloped once more into the fields, his silhouette framed against the horizon, free and unbroken, carrying with him the undeniable truth that worth is never lost, only waiting to be seen. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day.